Greetings everyone and welcome to the Occult Think Tank. My name is Greg. In this video I am going to expose how Christians distort and twist the Bible to try and make their case for Jesus being this big fucking hippie of peace and love. This video will be broken into 3 parts. The first part is dealing with bloodline and how Christians will try to distort that because they have to in order to have their half-man, half-God idea that is reflective of Greek mythology, not Judaism. There is no half-man, half-God concept in Judaism. Christians have a serious problem when it comes to bloodline because Jesus doesn't have a Jewish father according to the story in the New Testament. Remember, we are talking about bloodline, not adoption. You cannot be a bloodline descendant of someone if you are adopted. The thing is, the entire virgin birth concept is born out of ignorance regarding the Hebrew word Alma, which is referenced in Isaiah 7. This is what Christians attempt to use to link Jesus with the Old Testament and this king idea. However, they are ignorant of the context of Isaiah 7 and what the Hebrew word Alma means. Before I go into this, I want to quote what Matthew Kelly is claiming that you see before you. He starts off with this: Jesus is a king. No, he was never crowned king on earth, but his disciples saw him taken into heaven and seated at the right hand of God the Father, king. He is also of the line of David, and David was promised that the King of Kings would come from his bloodline. And though while on earth Jesus never sought to be crowned a king, he did spend his entire public ministry proving that he was the one prophesied about in the Old Testament through the line of David. Jesus is a king. Wait a minute, you're claiming, and I quote, "But the disciples saw him taken up into heaven and seated at the right hand of God the Father." Wait a minute. That is some massive claims that you're making. And I want you to give me the evidence that you have to prove this. Number one, that they saw him taken into heaven. Okay, maybe they saw him lifted into the sky. But then seated at the right hand of God. Were they going with him? How would they have seen where he was put once he was in this heaven? They would have had to have been there. And then where's the evidence that they were taken with him and that they were brought back so that they could give this account? Otherwise, Matthew Kelly, you're a liar. You're making shit up that is poetic. You're telling a story in order to hype the fiction. But what you're saying is bullshit. And you know it's bullshit. There is a very clear distortion being done here, and I want to point this out. Claiming Jesus is a king, yet admitting that he was never anointed king, shows we are dealing with dogma or doctrine, not something that is an actual, provable, or even historical fact. Calling God a king is a straw man Matthew Kelly and Christianity in general uses to try and shoehorn Jesus into this idea of being a king. You may be wondering why being a king matters at all, given that no time in the entire Bible does God ever say or even imply that he is a king. Being a god is a higher rank than that of a human king. So why would a god seek to take a lower man-made title over that of being an all-powerful being? Are we supposed to still be living under a monarchy where we have kings and queens? And if God is king, then who is queen? Plus, if God is king, then Jesus can't be a king as well, since that is not how kingship works. If God would be king, Jesus would at best be a prince, never able to take the throne himself, given the fact that his father will never die for him to actually become king. The truth is, the Messiah, which was a political term, not a religious one, is one Jesus could never fulfill, given the Christian idea of him being the Son of God. Even though being a Son of God is not something that only applies to one person, but is what all angels would be called. In fact, the phrase sons of God appears 5 times in the Old Testament, while Son of God only appears once in Daniel 3:25. I want to stress that sons of God and Son of God are referring to an angel, not some special title in itself. This is no different than how Son of Man simply refers to a human being. David was the first king of the Jews, followed by Solomon. The first temple that was built was the Temple of David. The second temple, which was around during the life of Jesus, was the Temple of Solomon. Since Jesus was never a Jewish king, he wouldn't have been able to build the third temple, which the Messiah was supposed to. And this gets into another way Christians openly try and distort what the temple is referring to. There is no argument that the first and second temple were physical buildings. But when it comes to Jesus, Christians want to play fast and loose with the temple and say, oh, that's his body. Changing the rules to try and fit their narrative. Another way Christians openly distort the Old Testament is with Isaiah 7. Christians are very quick to jump up and down screaming, that's out of context, whenever something doesn't fit their narrative. But when they do it, you are not even to realize it. Or if you do, don't you dare bring it up. Christians love to quote Isaiah 7:14. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. This word virgin is the Hebrew word alma. This is very important because an alma is simply a young woman. It is not a sexual virgin, as that is the Hebrew word Bethulah, Bethulah. However, the context of Isaiah 7 reveals that this has nothing to do with Jesus, but is talking about King Ahaz and his son who would become King Hezekiah. The idea that Jesus was of the line of David is a core claim Christians make, and is one Matthew Kelly had claimed. Yet according to their story, Joseph was not the biological father of Jesus. So Jesus can't be from the bloodline of David, as bloodline is not passed on by adoption. If bloodline is so critical for God and the Messiah, the fact that Jesus didn't have the correct bloodline means he couldn't have been the Messiah from birth. No one is born King of the Jews. That is simply another distortion of Judaism that Christianity makes. Just like no one is born President of the United States. One can achieve that political title in life if they do the necessary things, but it is not something that can be applied to a newborn. The fact that Christians openly distort things to push a narrative shows that they are being deceptive, although I think most of them are doing it out of ignorance, not out of a desire to deceive. Which brings me to the second part of this, where Matthew Kelly claims, secondly, your quote from Matthew 10 doesn't show narcissism, it's a prophecy. Jesus knew he was God and knew that his church would be everlasting. He knew that some would accept him as their Lord and Savior, and others would not. And that even within a family unit there would be division on this point because of him. He is telling his followers what to expect so they don't become discouraged, which in itself is far from narcissistic. Beyond that, he tells his followers to love, just love. Here we have a blatant distortion of Matthew 10:34 to 36. But we also have something that is in direct opposition to what is clearly stated over and over and over in the Old Testament. First, the claim Jesus knew he was God. In religious terms, this is blasphemy. As it is clearly written in Numbers 23:19, God is not a man nor son of a man. The phrase son of man simply refers to a human being. Secondly, the claim he knew his church would be everlasting is not written anywhere, and is in direct conflict with the fact that Christians are very big on the world will someday come to an end. If the world is going to come to an end, then the church can't be everlasting. Third, calling this prophecy is rather convenient, but nothing in the text indicates a time frame when this would happen. So what, is Jesus just making a blanket prophecy? Well, damn, anyone can do that. To give no time frame when something will happen, but say, someday this will happen. All I would say to this is even a blind squirrel can get a nut. Regarding this idea of Jesus being a savior, and who the God of the Bible said would be a savior, I need to point out a few things. Bear in mind, none of these are Jesus. Unless you are wanting to claim Jesus is the God of the Old Testament, which would be really bizarre given he didn't say he was the God of the Old Testament, but that the God of the Old Testament was his father, and we all know a father and son are different people. You can't have someone as father and son at the same time, and for this, I do feel I have to clarify, because some Christians might want to be stupid and be, well, I'm a father and I'm also a son. I'm talking of the same generation, of the same thing. Don't try and play fast and loose with things. You fuckers know damn well what I mean. And when you play games like that, all you're doing is showing that you know you're full of shit. You just refuse to admit it. This claim of Jesus being the Savior is in direct opposition to the multiple occurrences, 13 in fact, where in the Old Testament the God said that he was the Savior of the Jews, that there was no one besides him that was Savior. Before you is a list of all 13 places in the Old Testament where the God of the Bible calls himself, not Jesus, makes no mention of Jesus, but calls himself the Savior. I'm not going to read all of them, I'm only going to highlight a few. Like Isaiah 49:26. I will feed them that oppress with their own flesh, and they shall be drunk with their own blood, as with sweet wine. And all flesh shall know that I, the Lord, am thy Savior and thy Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. As well as Isaiah 43:11. I, even I, am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior. Isaiah 45:15. Verily thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, the Savior. I think it's made quite clear. The God of the Jews is the Savior, not Jesus. Jesus is trying to put himself in a position he does not deserve. Which, if anything, that would fit what Christians want to call the character of Lucifer, wanting to play God, someone that isn't God wanting to be God, to show themselves that they are God. That appears to be what Jesus is doing. To claim that Jesus told his followers to love, just love, is nothing but a flat-out, bold-faced lie. Not only did Jesus never say that, in fact he said quite the opposite in Luke 14:26. If any man come to me and hate not his father, mother, wife, and children, and brethren, and sisters, yea, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Which brings me to the third point, where Matthew Kelly claims, thirdly, the translation here to English is imperfect. The word hate doesn't mean anger, resentment, hate in the sense that we think about it. It's closer to detachment, knowing that God created all and everything is a gift to us, including our friends and family. God asks us to love His creation, but warns us not to confuse the created with the Creator, and to always put Him first. Not only is what Matthew Kelly claims completely false, and I will show you that, this really shows just how deceptive Christian preachers or evangelists really are. Notice he used the bad translation idea, which is another one they like to tout, just like their out of context claim. He claims it doesn't mean anger or resentment or hate in the sense that we think of it, but closer to detachment. Matthew Kelly, you, sir, are a liar. In the Greek, the word of hate that is used in Luke 14:26 is miseo, which has a primary meaning of hatred or to detest. What is not there is what you claim that it means, detachment. However, it gets worse, as the word hate in Luke 14:26 is the exact same word of hate that is used in Luke 6:22, Luke 6:27, John 7:7, and so on. If you want to claim that it means detachment, then when Jesus said about the world will hate him, you must be saying that the world will just be detached from Jesus. Oh wait, I bet you want to try and have a double standard, don't you? That in this one place, hatred means detachment, because otherwise it looks really bad for you. But then, in other places, then it actually means hatred, ignoring the fact that it is the same Greek word, and there is no evidence that there was any different meaning between the multiple uses. Bottom line is, Christian preachers or evangelists will not show you what I do. They want to push a narrative just like Fox, CNN, and MSNBC do on a daily basis. He is also not interested in the truth, but only in pushing ideas that benefit his team. The truth is, Jesus was not about love and peace, as Christians want to claim. He was about conflict and hate. The Jesus of the Bible is far more of a religious extremist, not a figure of love. A zealot, in Bible terms, or a religious fanatic, as we call it. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Later, people.